Kate Mila-Falcher, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, and before I talk about the book, I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me. We are an elite group, and I'm very happy to have you here. The books I've been doing in the past couple of books have been challenging. You know, we had a morally I don't know, I don't want to use the word political, but a morally, bureaucratically political, challenging book in Opus, and a philosophically challenging book in Elaine Pagel's book about Satan. Sorry, guys, the devil made me do it. Okay. This week, I thought, what could I do that I haven't already done that would be really out there and really fun? And I went to Thrift Books and I typed in paranormal. I was just really grasping at straws. Usually I have an inspiration ahead of time. And this particular book popped up. I read this book when it first came out, and it was published in 1975. I vaguely remember it. And it is really interesting. Let me show you the book, The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. This became an iconic book, a kind of, what's the word I want? A seminal work on the whole concept of large humanoid creatures wandering around in the woods of the United States. Harbingers of disaster, maybe. Messengers from UFOs, maybe. A lot of the activity that it starts out with, that tells a lot of different personal experiences, and I think you're going to love that. And it's, at the time in 1975, this was a challenging concept. Nowadays, we all talk about, UFOs and ETs and intergalactic travel like it's no big deal. But this was before, I think, before ET, the movie. I think it was before Close Encounters. It was just the very, very earliest stages in modern times, because this has been a subject cycling through history, but in modern times, it was definitely a period of time where people either thought it was demons or you were wearing your tinfoil hat. They had just coined the phrase not that long ago, flying saucers. And in fact, in this first part of the book anyway, he talks about flying saucers all the time. And at first I just put UFOs, and then I thought, no, I should stick to the original vernacular because it is a product of its time. But it's a really fun book. It talks about events that may now sound kind of familiar. They've sort of made their way into the zeitgeist, and people know these stories. Keep in mind, when this book was written, this was news to most people. Most people had no idea that these things had happened, that there was this sort of an historical record, that this wasn't unusual in the long-term historical lore of most cultures. And I like that he calls himself a UFO investigator, but he keeps kind of poking at the notion, demons, aliens, and I really appreciate that. However, it's based on true events. Now, we can't know for sure when they make reference to articles in newspapers from the 1880s. We can't know, of course, true, not true, hoaxes, hysteria. We don't know. But there is an underlying through line. There is sort of a connection to the present, which is intriguing. And the closer we get in time to present time, the more technology is put to bear on recording these things, and the more serious scientific minds are applying themselves to it, and it's not automatically debunked. So let's just read this book, and keep in mind, this is based on true stories. I'm not espousing anything. I'm just telling you, I'm synopsizing the stories, and I think it's a lot of fun, and it's challenging, it's intriguing, and some really serious things did happen. And I should say that John Keel is the person who coined the term Men in Black. So keep that in mind. It was never used before he used it as a capital letter thing. So this is supposed to be true events written by John Keel in 1975. The author is as a story in himself. I wrote this down. I don't even remember. I've read so many stories in this book, but his life is an interesting story in and of itself, and I'm going to make a separate video about that, because it's just, I had no idea how interesting it was. But this is a compelling book. It's a great story. So I'm going to attempt to hit the high points of the events that unfolded, but the writing draws you in. It's very descriptive. He's great at setting a stage, setting a scene, and which you'll see in a minute. I kind of make fun of how it starts out. Read the book. Definitely read the book. It's not a hard book to read. It's fast read. It's entertaining. You'll get a chuckle out of the anachronism. Well, not anachronisms, but the some of the stuff in the book didn't age well. We know so much more now. You have to bear with that. But it's kind of, fun to feel like, well, we know better. Okay. Keel was highly influential as a paranormal investigator, basically at the modern beginning of investigating UFOs, well known, prominent in the research world. This book was updated twice. It was updated in 1991, and then it was made into a movie in 2001. I haven't seen it. I should watch that. So let's start the Mothman story, chapter 1. It starts out with a bang. Beelzebub visits West Virginia. And we begin on November 1967 at 3 o'clock in the morning. And remember, I said it was just iconic book. The first description in the book is it was a dark and stormy night in a rural area, and there's a knock on a farmhouse door, and a young woman, obviously crawled out of bed to answer it. There is a 6-foot-tall man, bearded, which was unusual at that time. He says, we have to take it. I knew a lot of people with beards at that time, but I think we're talking West Virginia, and we're talking mainstream America. A lot of buzz cuts and clean shaven. Think Mad Men, that kind of look. So this man was very tall, over 6 feet. He was in a black suit, black tie, black hat, black overcoat, and really fancy polished black shoes that had mud all over them. And he asked to use the phone, and she said, we don't have a phone, and locked the door. So this couple that lived in there were completely weirded out by this visitor. It was inexplicable. It was odd. And they were religious, and they immediately thought, was this an omen? Now you have to keep in mind that this was in the middle of nowhere, and very uncommon for anybody to be out there in the middle of a storm at night in November on that road and then to come to the door. It freaked them out. So this young couple told all their friends, and they're all, the same, probably their church friends, and they were all superstitious about it. And, oh, this was a bad omen. And God, was this the devil? 3 weeks later, this is true. 3 weeks later, this couple died in the Silver Bridge collapse. And all of their friends said, oh, yeah, it was an omen. Now, the Silver Bridge collapse was a big disaster. I'm not going to go into it here. I'll go into it separately. So stay tuned and watch for that. The author claims that he was a weird guy. He needed a tow truck. He was the weird guy, and he was the one who went to the door. So he didn't know really that he stuck out like a sore thumb the way he was dressed. He was dressed in city clothes, and he didn't know that he freaked them out. And he didn't know that they considered him an omen of the devil. He had no idea until it all happened later. He found out. He was with a reporter from the local newspaper, and they were investigating local UFO sightings. Their car had gone off the road, and she stayed in the car when he went to get help. And a lot of the phones were out because of the storm. So when they said they had no phone, doesn't necessarily mean that they were cut off from civilization. It might mean that their phone was dead. But there was no weird man in black. There was no devil. There was no omen. And he uses this story right off the bat to illustrate that signs and omens are not always what they seem, and people do look for them. It depends on the context of your life, your worldview. He warns that events can be misconstrued. He's very careful about that. He doesn't jump to conclusions. He says, as a researcher, he sees coincidences all the time, repeated, and taking on a life of their own. They make that jump from synchronicity, coincidence to synchronicity. I do it all the time. And I think you get a feel for it, but people are raised in particular religious beliefs, and they're told to look for signs and omens. So you have to understand who you're dealing with. And he says that these coincidences that are strung together create a tapestry of the paranormal. I like how he writes. He's a really descriptive writer. But having said this, he says that his purpose in the book is to pursue the source of paranormal phenomenon that he describes in the book, and he goes back pretty far. He warns that he will debunk things. Don't expect him to be credulous. He debunks things, but he doesn't debunk everything. And by the way, he knew Jacques Vallée, or at least worked side by side a bit with him, or they both worked together on something. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's later on in the video, but I thought that was interesting that he really respected Jacques Vallée. He talks about debunking. He talks about this haunted New York City Greenwich Village house from, I believe, colonial times. It's called a haunted house. It used to belong to an author, Walter Gibson, which probably means nothing to most of us. It meant nothing to me. But in the 1930s, he wrote a whole string of books about a character called the Shadow. And it became a radio program. It became really popular in the 30s. And the Shadow knows, that even I recognize that little phrase. So this ghost was first seen in the 50s, and it only appeared after the death of Gibson, and it's described like the Shadow. So he says, come on, what is this? Is this superstition? Is this people enjoying? There's always a little bit of fun with that kind of thing. But he goes on to say, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not immediately debunk. Let's not be credulous, but let's not also be toxically skeptical about it. He says, what if, let's look at it from a larger metaphysical point of view, what if what we're seeing is a residue of the thoughts of the author of the Shadow? He thought about the Shadow constantly. What if that's what people are seeing? And what if it's only visible to people who have a certain psychic ability? So not everybody would see it, and not all the time. He said the Tibetans believed in something called tulpas. I hope I said that right. These are invisible energies that are conjured into the visible world by certain minds. Were the Tibetans right? So you can see that Keel is pretty open-minded. He's willing to entertain unconventional thoughts. He said UFOs are seen over sites that have other associated religious, paranormal, metaphysical aspects to them. For example, and now I'm using the language of the book. because I think this might offend some people, but this was written a long time ago, and we're all ignorant. It's an evolution, right? So he calls it the Indian mounds in Ohio, in the Ohio Valley. The Native Americans built these beautiful mounds, and for a long time, people thought they were rolling hills. They didn't even know, which is also true in Ireland. Uh, Newgate, is it Newgate? In Ireland is the buried mounds, and people, it's in the middle of a sheep field, and it looks like a little rolling hill until you get closer. So these mounds in Ohio, people didn't know what they were, and then they, probably digging around, they discovered there were things in these mounds, and a lot of them were leveled, and whatever artifacts were found were carried off, discarded. It's really kind of it's a very sad story. But are the UFOs the tulpas of long ago people? That's something to think about. We are venturing into a whole range of questions about UFOs in this book. He goes there when most people didn't. Most people, if they believed that flying saucers were a real thing, they were vehicles from another planet. Period. And we've moved in a more broader view where we're entertaining a lot more esoteric notions about them, and also scientific. But there is the work of Dr. Diane Pasulka, Jacques Vallée. Are these things related across time? They're not unique to us. The visible technological thing is unique to us, but it resonates with our culture and time period. Are these flying saucers of the 70s the same as the Tic Tacs that were seen by the Nimitz in 2004? And are they related to the flying sailing ships seen in the 1500s and on down into the 1800s? A lot of questions here. He said some of these mounds are more than 8,000 years old. He said it's difficult to be precise, but that's what they think. Some are shaped like elephants. He says, think about that. To our knowledge, there were no elephants in Ohio. So where did that idea come from? And also that they're best seen from high up in the air. So he posits a new theory that maybe there was an ancient worldwide culture supported by this. This is supported by advocates of the idea of Atlantis and Lemuria. Now, these are ideas at the time were almost unmentionable. I mean, in the late 60s, early 70s, if you talked about Atlantis, people looked at you twice. I think we're more open about it now. He mentions this newfangled writer that nobody's heard about called Eric von Daniken. This is why this book is hilarious. And he talks about him. I wrote like he's new to the UFO scene, but people, at the time that his books came out, and they continue to be controversial even today after his death. Some people call them misinterpretations of archaeology. That's for another video. He does admit that weird entities show up, and that UFOs have always, in some form, been with us in history. And so the question is, it begs the question, is this sort of phenomenon, is this weirdness, just normal on Earth? And we're making a big deal out of something that's a normal part of our environment. So he's theorizing here. He asks, do they live here in hiding? Are they aberrations of our minds, like the tulpas? Like we don't even know what they are. He says, are they not from space? Which is challenging the conventional thought at the time. They don't need to come from space because they've already always been here. So you can see this is early days. These questions are new. He said in the 1920s, a guy called Charles Fort said that if you study paranormal phenomenon and you establish a belief, it will adjust its manifestations to support your belief, escalating the phenomenon. Think about that. So if you push the notion that highly advanced civilizations from another planet are sending technologically advanced vehicles with extraterrestrial beings inside coming to the earth, if you espouse that and really push that and really believe that, it's more likely that that's what we're going to see. Kind of parallel to the notion of tulpas. It's coming out of our minds. What do we know? So he says, if you believe in UFOs enough, this is Charles Fort, they'll start landing in your yard. And I wrote in the margin, oh, come on. Because, well, I'd be gone if that were true. So Keel claims that when the UFO phenomenon didn't or doesn't look like superior technology or have technological details that resonate with the people writing the reports about them were tailored to fit the required level of sophistication. So in other words, something was seen, but they were manipulated to support people's already existing expectation or belief system. And they would ignore whatever was in the narrative, their preconceived narrative that wasn't supported. Says, therefore, a weird man all in black could be a government agent because ETs could not look that human and they didn't associate them with UFOs. So when the phenomenon of a guy in black all dressed up with the weird clothes that were a little old-fashioned but new looking, and he was weird looking, and we're going to hear plenty of those stories, shows up at your door after you've seen a UFO. A day or two later, this guy pulls up in an old-fashioned car, and it would not occur to many people. It would not have occurred to many people originally in the time frame during which he writes that those would be ETs, because that's not what they expected ETs to look like. And then he quotes Daniel Webster, there is nothing so powerful as truth, and often nothing so strange. So they tried flying after them, chasing them in the air. That didn't work. Astronomers haven't found any answers. Now, keep in mind, 1975. And the government at that time, they were not trained in how to investigate strange phenomenon on the earth. That was the farthest thing from government bureaucracy, military, not in their frame of reference. But the author was intrigued, and he decided to go to the source. And so he decided to go to West Virginia. So now we're on chapter 2, The Creep Who Came In From the Cold. Making reference to a spy story, a really good book, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, a really good book. I recommend it. So Friday, December 22nd, 1967, in West Virginia, a place called Point Pleasant. This is 1 week after the bridge disaster, and I will do a video just as an adjunct to this. A woman named Mary Heyer was making updates to the list of the bodies, the dead who had been found. They had not found everybody. And she worked for the newspaper and was suddenly thrust into the role of like liaison to the press, PR person. She was the only person in this small area who really had connections with the rescuers, connections with the law enforcement, and with the media, being a newspaper person. So she suddenly became the hub. Her office became the center of activity around this disaster. It was a block from the bridge. It was geographically well situated to be chosen, and her abilities, her connections. So she's in her office updating this really sad list, and 2 men come in, and they're very short, in black overcoats, and they walk up to the desk and they say to her, just like out of the blue, "We hear a lot of flying saucer activity happens around here." And as Keel says, this was the furthest thing from the people in the town's minds at the moment. Small town, everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew somebody who died. She just was curt. She said yes, and she gave them a folder of clippings to look at, which is, old days, right? And one of them asks her, "Has anyone told you not to publish these reports of the UFOs?" And she didn't answer. And he says, "What would you do if someone ordered you to stop writing about flying saucers?" She's pretty tough cookie. And she says, "I'd tell them to go to hell." So that kind of put paid to that conversation. They left. Later that day, another guy came in, a different guy who was short, and she describes him. Keel describes him. He had black hair and eyes. His eyes were, he had weirdly long tapered fingers. He wore an old-fashioned suit and tie, but they looked new and they didn't fit him right. And he had no overcoat, but it was really cold. He says to Mary, now keep in mind this is 1967. He says, "My name is Jack Brown. I'm a UFO researcher." And he asks her, "What would you do if somebody ordered you to stop printing UFO stories?" And she said, "Are you with those other two guys?" The two who came in this morning. And he said, "No, I'm a friend of Gray Barker. This was a guy who was pretty well known in West Virginia because he was investigating the UFO sightings. And he eventually did publish books, or at least a book, on UFOs." And then she says to the guy, "Do you know John Keel?" Now, Keel and she have been driving around looking for UFOs. "Do you know John Keel?" And the guy says to her, he got really, really nervous, and he says, "He's a liar." And she says, "Well, no, he's not a liar. I've been with him and we've seen things." So this guy wanted her to take him to the places where she and Keel had seen UFOs. So it's like right then, lock the office and go out with him. And she said, "No, thank you." So this book, I will warn you, is not a chronological story. It often goes back in time and tells little vignettes, little stories of things that are eventually related. He does draw the thread between all of them, building up to what's happening in his immediate time period. But you do have to interrupt that moment with her in her office chasing the weird guys out. Now we're going to talk about 1897, April of 1897. Now this all comes from local reporting in newspapers, and you can look them up, on the internet. An oblong machine with wings and lights came out of the sky and landed on a Rockland, Texas farm of John Barclay. He was looking out the window. He saw this. He grabbed his gun and ran out to see what it was he was looking at. A normal-looking human guy came out of this machine, handed Barclay a $10 bill, and asked him to go buy oil and tools to work on his machine. And Barclay said, "Who are you?" Now, this is 1897. This thing flew. The guy says, "Never mind, just call me Smith." So in 1897, Keel says, weird visitors were showing up all over the place with common names like Smith and Jones, claiming to know prominent locals. They would, like this Brown guy, they would show up somewhere, introduce themselves. "I'm a pal of so-and-so." And then the prominent town person, supposedly the friend of the weird guy, would have never heard of him, had no idea what people were talking about. Proved to be not true, and proved that nobody really knew them locally. Now, Keel's very careful to say, look, there were many hoaxes. There was a hoax that was revived in 1972. So there had been the site of one of these weird 1890s visits. And in 72, a treasure hunter went with a metal detector around the site of where this thing was supposed to have been and dug under the ground and found bits of aluminum buried at the site. This stirred up all kinds of enthusiasm, and UFO hunters and researchers and enthusiasts showed up from all over the place, to find the site of the visitors in 1890. And it turned out that the investigator, the original guy with the metal detector, was himself a hoaxer. So who knows what he was up to, but you have to be very careful when you hear these stories. They, on the surface, on face value, they seem like maybe something happened, but when you dig into it, but they're not all hoaxes, and that's the weird thing. So the author met the niece of Mary Hyre. Now, Mary Hyre is the newspaper woman, making the lists, chasing out the weird guys, refusing to go with them. She has a niece named Connie Carpenter. And she said to Keel, well, I encountered a UFO. And he believed her because he said that when he talked to her, he was introduced and he said her eyes were all red and swollen, and not okay. And he asked what happened, and she said, well, I just saw a UFO, like it had just happened the day before, the night before, and it had shined this huge light at her, and it had injured her eyes. Now there's a term for this. It's called Klieg conjunctivitis. It's an irritation of the eye caused by the particular rays of the light. Now you get this from looking at the sun directly. And he says he's seen this a number of times. He saw one extreme case Wednesday, October 3rd, 1973 in Missouri. A 45-year-old named Eddie Webb saw a luminous object as he was driving along in his truck. In the rearview mirror, he saw this light following him. And he slowed down and he stuck his head out and he looked back to see what the heck it was. And there was a huge bright light flash. The lenses fell out of his glasses. The glass frame melted, and he couldn't see. He was blind. He somehow managed to get to the emergency room, and eventually he was okay, but it took him a long time to recover. He did get his sight back. But that's not what happened to Connie. This is where it gets really interesting. Now, keep in mind, this is West Virginia, and this is around the time of the bridge collapse, right after the bridge collapse. And it turns out she had an encounter with a giant winged man, not a flying saucer. I'm sure you wondered when Mothman was coming into this. Well, that really is what we're going to be talking about. Connie, who was 18, was driving home about 10:30 in the morning, broad daylight, November of 66. So actually it was, he met her before the collapse, because I think it doesn't matter really. He met her, it had just happened. She was passing the golf course. This is in the morning, right? And she saw a 7-foot tall, very broad, like tall and big guy, gray. Well, she thought it was a guy, but it was too big, kind of gray and shaped like a man. But when she got a little closer and she slowed and looked at it, it had red glowing eyes, and they were hypnotic. She couldn't not look. It had wings with a 10-foot span. It lifted itself up. It rose slowly off the ground like a helicopter, and it headed towards her, and it swooped over her car. And at this point, she was just hysterical and sped away. But then this irritation of the eyes showed up. And it lasted for more than 2 weeks. Keel talks about, this thing she describes, this sort of thing has been seen all over the United States. There's one guy who reported seeing something like this more than 100 times. And he starts mentioning some of these weird encounters. Now, I at first put in some identifying information. All of these stories tell you date, time, place, the names of people, and it's really one of the anachronism. Well, weird old-fashioned things about it is that he refers to all the women as Miss this and Mrs. that. You know, it's very formal. But the summer of 1967, Max's Kansas City is a bar, middle of New York City. A guy walked in and he stuck out like a sore thumb. He was tall, awkward. He had a very dated but brand new looking black suit, and he had a weirdly pointed chin. He didn't look typical. He had a weirdly pointed chin. His eyes were kind of bulgy. His fingers were long and tapered, and he had what's called peculiar ears. I put a question mark because they didn't elaborate. He's making here a small list of some examples. He's cherry picking. That one was interesting because it was, right in the middle of New York City. Then there's one, Mrs. Butler from Minnesota. She describes a flurry of UFO sightings around her house. And then she had a stranger come to the house. He said he was a major French of the U.S. Air Force, but he was in a brand new civilian suit that was out of style, brand new shoes that were out of style. He was only about 5'9", so he wasn't 7 feet tall, but he had a pointy chin and very long dark hair, and it struck her as extremely weird because he claimed to be in the military, but he wasn't wearing a uniform and he had long hair in the military. They didn't put up with that in the 60s. She said he had a conversation with her. He seemed normal, but then he started to complain that his stomach was bothering him. And this is just so weird. She offered him some Jell-O. She had made Jell-O earlier in the day, and it's the only thing she had available. She said, well, maybe this would settle your stomach. He tried to drink it. Hang on. Excuse me. He tried to drink it. She had to show him how to use a spoon. He didn't know what to do with the spoon. So there's that. In 1967, and we think about this now, I think about, would I let a guy into the house? I don't think so. In 1967, there was a flurry of UFO reportings or sightings, and the people that, and this is nationally, a lot of the people who were experiencers or had witnessed these UFOs later had really strange visits. And what ended up happening, these were reported many times in local newspapers, and there started to be a growing paranoia that the Air Force was trying to silence and intimidate. There were even murders, people who had witnessed stuff. Now, the murders part, that's an allegation, but he didn't elaborate on it, but I'm not that far into the book, so he may elaborate on it in later chapters. Keel took a lot of reports, and at first he was really skeptical. He was like, oh, I don't think so. But then he noticed that the many small, weird similarities, the details that these stories had in common. Now, these stories, he would get wind of them. People would call him, and because they knew that he was an investigative reporter, and his specialty was UFO stories. And other reporters would hear about this. Other local, the very beginnings of UFO research groups would hear these stories. And they'd call him before they were ever printed in public. So they weren't reading other people's reports and parroting what they read. A lot of these stories were not made public, but they sounded the same. And the details, describing these guys and what happened. And these witnesses were strangers to each other. They were scattered all over the country. Almost every story included similar small, weird details. The weird guy or guys would show up in a very old model cars, but they looked 100% brand new. They wore very old-fashioned formal clothes that looked brand new, but didn't fit right. If they said that they were military, they weren't in uniform. They didn't have a standard military haircut. They didn't know anything about military because they would identify themselves as in the military. And sometimes these witnesses were vets, and they'd talk to them like a fellow soldier. And these weird guys would display their ignorance. If they were asked for ID, they'd pull out a wallet that was absolutely brand new. They often asked to keep something odd before they left. They'd ask for a souvenir, like, can I keep this pen? Can I just take this random magazine or some small object? I don't know, like an ashtray or something. Especially odd was they were described a little bit like some of the entities, beings, ETs seen with UFOs that landed, and sometimes that people had even spoken to. Now, he describes them a particular way, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know what's okay to present terminology, but he describes them as vaguely Asian. Not Asian, but vaguely Asian. And I'm not entirely sure what he means by that, but it's in the book and I put it out there. He does mention they all talk about long tapered fingers. In other words, their fingers were longer than they should be and they came to a point. For example, December of 1967, a woman called Linda Scarberry, she brought home her new baby. And she lived with her husband in a basement apartment that she shared with her husband and baby in his parents' home. And these are the McDaniels. So she and her husband had seen this weird bird man, this huge winged man at Point Pleasant the year before. There had been sightings of this thing over the bridge for quite a while before the bridge collapsed, and reported before the bridge collapsed. Since the sighting, they'd had a number of strange visitors, including reporters, researchers. So on the day that she brought this baby home, this guy showed up called Jack Brown. He introduced himself as friends of Mary Hyre, the reporter, and John Keel, our author. He hauled in with him a large old-fashioned tape recorder, but he didn't know how to work it. He didn't know how to thread it. He didn't know how to set it up. And they're like, this is weird. His line of question was not typical of the previous researchers and reporters. He knew nothing about the UFOs that had been sighted, nothing about the Birdman. His focus was, where is John Keel? What is his relationship with Mary Hyre? Then he asked them, how would Mary Hyre react if she was ordered to stop reporting on UFOs? So while he was there, and he was there, it turns out he stayed for 5 hours. That's called overstaying your welcome. Keep in mind, she's just home with a brand new baby. Lots of people were in and out, relatives and friends, neighbors, to see the baby, but he never looked at the baby. He never showed any interest in the baby. He had nothing to do with this new baby, which was the center of attention. He didn't know how to shake hands with people when they offered their hand. He said he was from a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. He called Cambridge, but he'd never heard of the main newspaper. Oh, people, people were familiar with that area. And they said, oh, did you read this blah, blah, blah in the paper? He'd never heard of the paper. He didn't know the name. He didn't really know anything other than the name of this small town he claimed to be from. And he appeared to really not have any idea what he was talking about. He made everyone uncomfortable. They compared notes later. He didn't have a normal conversation. He had a piercing, really disturbing gaze. As I said, he overstayed 5 hours. He didn't leave till 11 o'clock at night. Oh my God. He contradicted himself. He said at first, I don't know John Keel, but then later he said, I'm friends with John Keel. And people were like, what is this guy talking about? He claimed that Gray Barker told him that a UFO was seen over the Silver Bridge just before it collapsed. Barker later denied ever meeting Brown. He did not know him. He had never had anything to do with him. Barker said it was not a UFO. It was a flash that they later believed to be the snapping of power cables. But many reports were made of people seeing a weird flying guy. Jack Brown finally left, and he was never seen anywhere in West Virginia again. So what was his purpose? Who was he? Was he just there to increase the paranoia of UFO enthusiasts? Was he there to keep a myth alive? Like, there are no answers. It's just really weird. In 1966, Keel went to the Pentagon and talked with Lieutenant Colonel Maston Jacks. Jack's job was to handle reporters who came to him asking about UFOs, like John Keel. He told Keel, there's nothing to it. It's all a lot of hearsay. Meanwhile, on his desk was a red folder that said top secret with news clippings, and some of them were sticking out, and it was obvious they were about UFOs. So when Keel pushed back and said that he himself had seen UFOs, the major took offense. And, well, you're calling an officer of the U.S. Air Force a liar, sir? He told Keel numerous times that the U.S. Air Force did not have any UFO files. A year later, a science writer, Lloyd Malin, got files from the U.S. Air Force with more than 100 pictures taken by the U.S. Air Force. Jacks then told Keel that all UFO records were stored at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, not at the Pentagon. So first they had no records. Then it was the records at Wright-Patterson. A journalist called Mort Young, he went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and was told, there are no records here. They're all at the Pentagon. Or have you checked with Project Blue Book at their headquarters in Dayton? So when Keel received files from the Blue Book, eventually, individual reports, they were a mess. Individual reports had missing pages. Conclusions often just said no information. Things were redacted. Pages were in tatters. They were jammed like wadded up trash into folders. Nothing was in chronological order. Keel's impression was that the confusion and the mess of the files and the confusion and the mess of what was said to people were intentional, that they were lying outrageously. Keel knew of citizens sending pictures to the Air Force that were never seen again. But he knew that they'd been sent to the Air Force. Keel and Malin had much documentation of all these sightings of weird guys visiting UFO witnesses, trying to shut them up. First person signed narratives of this happening. But Jacks retired. He just refused to deal. And he retired, and his replacement was Lieutenant Colonel Freeman, and he was much more open about the whole thing. In February of 1967, after a confidential letter from the Pentagon went out to all commands, let's see here. This is what the Pentagon said to everybody in the military. Information has reached the headquarters of the U.S. Air Force that persons claiming to represent the Air Force or other defense establishments have contacted citizens who have sighted unidentified flying objects. In one reported case, an individual in civilian clothes who represented himself as a member of NORAD demanded and received photos belonging to a private citizen. In another, a person in an Air Force uniform approached local police and other citizens who had sighted a UFO, assembled them in a schoolroom, and told them they did not see what they thought they saw and that they should not talk to anyone about the sighting. All military and civilian personnel, and particularly information officers and UFO investigating officers, because they existed, who hear of such reports should immediately notify their local Office of Special Investigations. Signed, Hewitt T. Wellis, Lieutenant General, U.S. Air Force, Assistant Vice Chief of Staff. And then Project Blue Book was shut down. But the guys in black continued to be seen. These are the men in black. And they weren't just seen in West Virginia or the United States. They were seen around the world for example, there was one case that he doesn't go into in enormous detail because it's just similar. And they were seen in Sweden. So that's the end of that chapter. And I think this is a good place to stop. The plot thickens. Times change, right? I mean, how times have changed. The Pentagon knows nothing about it. Today, in modern day, the Pentagon has made a public congressional announcement that they have, oh, look at our pictures, look at our radar, listen to our recordings. So, yeah. So this is the end of video 2. I'm sorry, this is the end of video number 1. And we'll be back with video number 2. And I hope you're enjoying this. We'll be starting with chapter 3. So, thanks for watching. Slanga foil. Slancha.